Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. Forgive the Insider video with the hat on. Haven't actually had time to shower yet this morning. If you're just seeing this and you've seen nothing else, and I would be surprised if that's the case, Indiana has fired Tom Allen after 7 years as its head coach. I don't think anybody is particularly surprised by this. I think there had been questions across the course of this season about whether Indiana was going to be willing to pay an 8-figure buyout. Obviously, it's north of $20 million right now. That doesn't mean that it can't be negotiated down. Sometimes, coaches, maybe the school will agree to waive its mitigation clause, or a coach would rather just have maybe some one-time payments a little bit closer to whatever. I'm not saying it will be. I'm just saying sometimes it can be. But I think certainly the mood music in the last couple of weeks had been sort of playing in this direction. And I think the big question, for Indiana was maybe less about would the department find a way to meet the buyout, and more about essentially did the department feel like it had did Scott Dolson and Pam Whitten, I suspect, will also be pretty central in this, Indiana's president. Did they feel like they had a firm idea of where they wanted to go, in a different direction? And I think they do. And to kind of spin this forward, we've got a podcast up right now, both on the YouTube channel and also through Mind Your Banners, all your normal podcast channels, Apple, Spotify, all that stuff. That kind of goes into Mike Neislick and I go into a little bit more detail about kind of how Indiana wound up here and that sort of thing before talking about where Indiana goes next. I wanted this video to really spin forward, and it won't be the longest in the world, but I think it is worth kind of saying this. Number one, I do think Indiana is going to try to move very quickly here. That's not surprising. That's almost, everybody always wants to move fairly quickly through coaching searches. That's even more important now when you consider the portal window opens on December 4th. It's never been more important when you make a coaching change to be decisive about, where you're going, who you're hiring, what you want to do, what you want it to look like. I think that Indiana will try to move very quickly in this. I think it's got a defined, if not a defined list of candidates, though I suspect Dolson and Pam Whitten have probably some names in mind, at least as sort of a starting point. I really do think it is probably fair to say that unless somebody just absolutely blows them out of the water, the profile of coach that we're probably talking about for Indiana in this search is going to be someone with a long established track record of head coaching success. Is that someone at a smaller job now, maybe a Sunbelt job, a MAC job, but someone that's got extensive head coaching experience, has run their own program for a long time, is not going to need any hand-holding in that area. It's going to be more about sort of, let's make sure we provide this person with the staffing resources, the NIL resources, et cetera. Or is it somebody like maybe a Dan Mullen, maybe a Paul Christ, who is not a head coach right now, but obviously has an established track record of success, from previous stops. Mullen, as an example, and this is not me trying to hint at Dan Mullen, please understand, but using Mullen as an example, he'd been in a program not dissimilar to Indiana, down in the SEC in Mississippi State, a program that, yes, will always care deeply about football, but does not have a long sort of track record of success. And Mullen had the Bulldogs in bowl games for 7 or 8 straight seasons before he went to Florida. So I think it's going to be someone in that profile, whether it's someone taking a step up or it's someone who's maybe been out for a little bit but is going to step back in, or maybe even you go somewhere, maybe you try to find a Big 12 coach or someone like that wants the security of being in a more established conference. I don't know. But I do think that this is going to materialize fairly quickly. I think we're talking maybe days more so than weeks, for Indiana right now and for Scott Dolson and Pam Whitten. And then I think that the next question really will be, where Indiana will pay. And I would be surprised. I know Indiana has put a pretty big whack of money on the table to move on from Tom Allen. If that buyout isn't negotiated down between Allen and his assistants, you're talking in excess of $23 million. Some of it would be owed by June, basically just paying out essentially the the remainder of his assistant coaches' contracts. The rest, obviously, to Allen would be owed across the next 4 years, again, unless there's some sort of agreement to sort of rework that buyout. But, having said that, you don't spend all your money to fire a coach and then try to sort of go cheap on the next hire. This is an aggressive move. It's a front foot move. It's a move that says we're not going to kind of let the decline continue. And you don't spend all your money on, sort of the change just to not be able to spend it on the hire. So I would expect that Indiana will put pretty significant money on the table for whomever it hires, both in terms of that coach, and whatever his compensation is, but also certainly his pool for assistants, for strength staff, for all those sort of different things. Sorry, that's my kids. It's still Sunday morning in my house. The last thing I would say here is, and I don't know that, these are things where some coaches will claim or some schools will claim they have specific numbers. Fan bases love to talk in big round numbers. I don't know if Indiana's got like a hard and fast, here is the for lack of a better term, the budget. And this is the way everybody has to think about NIL to some extent now. But I do think Indiana is going to be able to put millions, plural. And I had that in a story that if it's not up on indystar.com/sports by the time you watch this, it should be very, very soon. That's in a story that a pretty lengthy sort of, I guess, post-mortem of Tom Allen's tenure, spinning forward to what Scott Dolson's got to take out of that tenure and move forward with, what the lessons Indiana has to learn and where it can go from here. This details in there as well. I do think Indiana is going to be able to offer its next head coach, like I said, millions, plural, in NIL resources. And so Indiana is not going to be going into this sort of asking for miracles. Now, that's not to say Indiana's going into this expecting to compete with the Ohio States or the Michigans, but I do think that relative to, let's say some of the other programs that Indiana's kind of annually trying to compete to stay ahead of in the Big Ten, the Purdue's, the Illinois, the Northwesterns, even to some extent the Minnesotas, the Iowas, etc. I think Indiana's actually going to be able to be competitive in the NIL space with some of those schools. And then it's going to be a question of basically, can you marshal those resources adequately to give yourself the roster that you need to win? It is a tough job. I don't think there is any doubt about that. I don't think anyone would take that. Forgive me. It's a bit chaotic outside my office door right now. I don't think anybody would dispute that. I don't think anybody who interviews for this job, certainly anyone who would accept this job, would lie to themselves and tell themselves that it is not a job with some challenges, but it is a job with some opportunity as well. The last two coaches have each been to multiple bowl games in Bloomington. The program has spent, demonstrably more. I mean, Indiana reported about $15.2 million in football-specific operating expenses in 2012. In 2022, that number had gone up to well over $31 million. So the complaints that Indiana's not spending money on football don't quite ring true. And I think that it is probably fair to say that commitment will continue to sort of increase with this next head coach, both in terms of the resources for staffing and infrastructure and things like that, and also for NIL. And then I think that the next thing for Scott Dolson after this will be to try and build some success around this hire that allows him to really kind of ride through on, I think, some big priorities moving forward. Number one, he's talked about this publicly with us and others, the desire to dramatically renovate Memorial Stadium's east and west stands. And number two, Indiana's already committed to creating a football-specific strength training area. I think Mullen Camp Pavilion, probably the indoor practice facility, also needs some long-term love and care as well. That stuff it's a lot easier to sort of generate momentum and fundraising for if obviously the product on the pitch, or forgive me, I'm a soccer fan, the product on the field is kind of in a better place than it's been the last 2 or 3 years. And so all this stuff ties together. It always does. And then, of course, there is the wider landscape of playoff expansion and conference consolidation and how Indiana kind of cocoons itself through that, how it tries to succeed through a more difficult Big Ten and all those things. I don't think Scott Dolson or Pam Whitten are blind to any of that. If anything, I think that's probably what caused them to move today, to move more quickly than maybe some people expected, to be a little bit more sort of financially aggressive than some people expected. And like I said, I think if they have their way, the search process probably won't take a tremendous amount of time either. So we will see how it plays out. We'll leave it there for now. IndyStar.com/sports, HeraldTimesOnline.com, everything you're going to need around this coaching search, candidates, hot boards, updates, details, everything. We will cover every base we possibly can. Thank you so much for watching, and we will talk to you soon.